Welcome back to Apostles Mailbox, where it's been a while, a little bit longer than normal between episodes, but I'm excited to be back, and we're going to do something today that I've never done on this show yet. So what are we doing that we've never done before? A book review. It's gonna be interesting. I gotta get full disclosure here. Okay, the book is called Holy Roar. It's by Chris Tomlin and Darren Whitehead. And listen to the subtitle: 7 words that will change the way you worship. Okay, now when I read that kind of a subtitle, and this will come as no surprise to you if you know me personally, I don't think like, wow, I got to read that book. It's going to change the way I worship. The cynical me says, oh yeah, please. I've heard that one before, right? So I read the subtitle, major turnoff to me. I'm thinking, oh, way to oversell this. Right. But a friend recommended the book that Lisa and I both read it. She said it was really good. And so we said, thanks. I put it on my shelf and I thought, I wonder how long it's going to take me to actually get to that book, because I got a lot to read. And I read that subtitle and I went, oh, please. I also got to let you know that I was predisposed to assume that it would be overinflated and overstated. And the reason for that is because the basic premise is that there's 7 different Hebrew words that are essentially translated worship or praise in the Old Testament, and they all have a different sense to them, and that if you understand the different sense of all of these 7 words, like, it will help you worship differently. And so when I read that was the premise, in some ways that made me even more suspicious. So psychologists, maybe, I don't know, there's this idea out there that's sometimes referred to as, I believe it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically says, like, people who know a little bit about a topic usually think they understand way more than they do about the topic. And you hear this from time to time, especially the more you understand about a topic. If you're a master whatever, if you're a master plumber and you listen to a guy who's a weekend warrior, just plumbed his own bathroom, and he's explaining to you all the brilliant things about plumbing that he understands, like, it takes about 10 minutes before you realize that he's convinced that he's utterly right about things that he doesn't understand in the least, and that he made all these rookie mistakes and he really doesn't know, but he thinks he's an expert plumber, right? Because he plumbed his bathroom, or anything. Like, we all think we're experts. We know, I shouldn't say that. Many of us think we're experts when we understand little. And the more you learn about something, the more you realize there is to learn. And you can spend a lifetime studying something, and then you can say, like, but there's still so much that I don't understand. But somebody like really getting in won't do that. And so pastors, they learn a little bit of Greek or Hebrew in seminary, and they read something in a commentary, and all of a sudden they're an expert on it, and, guilty as charged, done it myself, I guarantee it. And, Lisa accused me of this all the time. But it comes up a lot in sermons. If you sit and you listen to sermons, and, the pastor gets up there and he makes his point about, this Greek thing or that Hebrew thing. And sometimes one time even heard a guy where I was like, oh, you know what? We read a book in seminary called Exegetical Fallacies, and in the book, that was the example of a way to misinterpret the Greek and misunderstand it. And that was the illustration of don't do this. And then I just heard a pastor do it in church. And and of course it sounds very impressive to everybody. Everybody's like, ooh, he knows Greek. I love it. We really learned a lot of stuff today. And people who understand, they just go, what are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do? So I was afraid it was going to be one of those, some guy talking about Hebrew words that he didn't understand, making big grand points and really overblowing his case, overstating his case. And I was just afraid it was going to be that. So I didn't really want to read the book. Okay. But my wife, she pulled it off the shelf. She read it. She finished it. And she says, wow, that book, that's really good. You should read this. And I was like, really? Because my wife knows me. And she knows, like, she wouldn't recommend to me a book that would be like that, I don't think. And so then I was a little bit intrigued. And then she said, and by the way, it's a really easy read. And you probably read it in a day. Might even take you a couple hours. And I was like, I could give it a couple hours. So I sat down and I started to read. And would you believe it? I think I read the intro and the first chapter, and I really enjoyed it. Like, I really enjoyed it. And my brain didn't have these alarm going off, like, oh, he's overstating his case, or you can't draw that conclusion, or that's a logical fallacy. Like, none of that was going off in my head as I read. I was like, well, this was just refreshing. This was encouraging. This was good. I want to read another chapter. And I read the whole thing in more or less one sitting, I think. Might have taken a break in the middle. I think it took probably 2.5 hours to read the whole book. And I looked up all the scriptures at the end of each chapter with the discussion questions, too. And it was wonderful. It was a little bit intellectually stimulating. Wasn't super deep. It wasn't a hard read. The anecdotes, the illustrations were good. And pastorally, I was just refreshed. Right? So the way it's sort of set up is that each chapter begins with a teaching from the pastor, right? And he tells some stories here, and he explains the Hebrew word, and then Chris Tomlin, who's a musician, if you're not familiar with him, will tell a story about how that concept of worship connected with a song that he wrote or that he performed or recorded. And so he will bring that concept and just give you like a real practical example from his life or the life of somebody he knew of how that connected to music. And so in some ways, like, it's very like practical, but it's not, it doesn't get monotonous because there's like teaching, and then there's this illustration, and then there's some scriptures that you can look up and discussion questions, which are just, they're fine. They're standard fare for what American small groups do. And so like, it's just this nice rhythm, and there's 7 of them, right? So one chapter for each of those that has a little bit of teaching and a story about a song and some scripture and things to think about. And so like, I read the whole thing and I really enjoyed it. And it was so refreshing to me in a few levels. Like, number one, I don't feel like the preaching part of it was like there were logical fallacies or things that I had to sort of choke down that I was like, oh, he's way overstating his case. He didn't try to make a big deal. Will it change the way I worship? Will it transform my whole life? No, but on the other hand, it also invited me, I think, into a little bit more freedom in worship, and it was an encouragement to me to, engage emotionally in the music that I'm singing, and let the teaching be more teaching and intellectual, and the singing be more of a physically, emotionally engaging process. And it was just very like practical, but also pastorally, and maybe this was it too. Pastorally, it sort of hit me where I was at that day, and it invited me into worship. And some of these songs, even as I read about the story behind the music, I just look them up on YouTube and just worship with them. And it was so refreshing. And so I was like, this was wonderful. Now, again, full disclosure, I liked the message that he wrote. So sometimes when you like something, you miss some things maybe that, critically speaking, should get more of your attention. And so I didn't notice, like I said, I didn't notice any glaring like intellectual, theological, logical problems with it. That doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that I was sort of caught up in worship, and I was encouraged, and I was challenged, and I was blessed. And of course, read any book and there's things wrong with it, but I didn't find anything in this book that I objected to. It was refreshing. It took me 2 hours, 2.5 hours, let's say, to read it and work through the scriptures and to enjoy it. And I found by the end, I was like, I think this would be a blessing to other people as well. And so I wanted to take an episode and just really encourage you to go and buy a copy of this book and read it. And then when you're done, like, hand it to somebody else at your church and let them be blessed by it too. This is something that, the chapters are short, and there's 7 of them. This would go good in that rack of magazines in your bathroom, right? Or on your coffee table. It's not something that you have to devote a lot of time and energy to. It would be something that would be great to read. You read one short chapter before bed each night. You'd be done in a week. And I think it would be good, and it would be refreshing and a blessing to your soul. So I really do think that there are 7 words that might have a little impact on the way you worship. Change the way you worship just sounds sort of like dramatic to me. But it was a good book, and I'm glad my friend dropped it off, and I'm glad my wife read it first and pushed me to read it. And I'm glad that morning that I sat down early enough in the morning when I had time to just sit and read the introduction in the first chapter and to enjoy it and to get sucked in so that I could have that day of refreshing and of worship when, frankly, lately there's been just a lot of intellectual, theological things going on here, and my soul's been a little bit dry in some of that. And so it was very good. It was very good. And so pick up a copy. Read it. That's my advice to you. That's my encouragement to you. If you're a worship pastor or something, read it and get a handful and hand them out to your worship team, or maybe do a Sunday school class on it or something in your church. I think would be healthy. Yeah. So, and if you read it and you're like, that's a terrible book, then tell me about it or don't. I don't care. I enjoyed it. And I think you will too. God bless you. We'll see you again here soon.